Hello? Anybody?
Hi, Rifat.
Hi, Rifat.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Oh, awesome. Good. Had some trouble. Anis, can you hear me? You there? That Hannes also had some issues. Oh, okay. Okay, he can hear me now, so I guess it's my side. Okay. Okay. We're 1 minute past. Let's wait a minute or two, give people a chance to join, and we'll get going. Sorry about the technical challenges here.
Oh shit, what am I doing?
Hello, Brian.
Michael?
Is it just the two of us?
There's a whole. I'm trying to find my way around the.
It says 24 attendees.
24?
25
now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gang's all here.
Okay. Let's get going. Okay. So, okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a series of OAUTH group interim meetings. Let's get going. So this is an OAuth reminder that this applies here. The OAuth governs everything that we do at the IETF, including code of conduct, patents, and many other things. If you're not familiar with this, so please make sure you're familiar with this and kind of take the time to learn more about this. Hannes, you have a comment or question? You good? Okay. The note really well is we expect a respectful and professional kind of discussion and collaboration here. Hostile or intimidating behaviors are not acceptable. So if you feel harassed or being intimidated, feel free to reach out to the chairs and we'll try to handle that. Now, during those meetings, we will not make any final decisions. Decisions will be made on the mailing list. So I just want to make it clear this is not really related to the NOTWELL, but I would like to note that any decisions that we will be making, it will be on the mailing list. Okay, so we have a series of interims. We're starting today with SDG VC. And next week we'll be talking about transaction token and identity chaining. All those meetings at the same time, Monday at 12 Eastern time. So that's for December. After that, we have a break for the holidays, and then in January start again Mondays at 12 Eastern, client ID scheme in January 6th, and then token status list, one-time token after that, and the last one will be private key JOT issue. We'll get more details about this later when we get to that topic at that time, right? So that's our plan for the coming few weeks for those interims. Any questions, comments about this or anything? Okay. If not, I will hand it to Brian. Let me stop sharing here. And Brian, you can go ahead and share and drive it from there.
Trying to use Meet Echo here the right way. Can
so go share slides. Right? You go for share slides. Go ahead, Hannes. Sorry.
Oh, does it work now? Can you hear me?
You okay, Hannes? Sorry, Brian. Oh yeah, I think it's coming. Do you want me to share it from my side, Brian?
Yes. Sorry, I assumed I would share through here, so it's all recorded and.
Yeah, try it. You want to try it?
If you let him bring the slides up, he can pass control to you.
That's what I had in mind.
Okay, let me see. Hold on.
Sorry, yeah. Those ones. Oh.
That's you doing it, but that's okay.
That's
it's up
me.
now.
There you go. Yeah.
And I can navigate. Excellent. Okay.
Yes,
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
These are
worries.
wonderful tools, but they seem to change between each iteration.
Yeah. And before you get going, if anybody wants to have a question or a comment, please join the queue first. There is a queue button there. If you're not familiar with it, make sure to use that queue before you say anything. Okay. There you go. Go ahead, Hannes. Yes.
And the whole group, can you hear me now?
Yes, okay, we can.
Finally.
Yes.
Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Hannes. Yeah, I had same trouble at the beginning. Okay, let's hand it to Brian. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, thank you, Tim. So here we are as first of a series of interim meetings, as Rifat and Hannes have so nicely introduced. The first topic, obviously, as we now see, is SD-JOT VC. I drew the short straw here and will be presenting on behalf of the document co-authors, Daniel, Oliver, and myself. I can't see all my content. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so real quick agenda, because, whatever. Going to give a really, really brief overview of what this document is, talk about some of the changes we've put in since Dublin, revisit some of the goals, aspirations, and expectations around this document, cover some of the happenings before, during, and since Dublin, and talk about some next steps. So real brief, like I said, SD-JOT VC, it describes data formats, as well as validation and processing rules to express so-called verifiable credentials, now somewhat being more referred to as digital credentials. So you'll see a little bit of mix of that across the document, but it's mostly still verifiable credentials in name. These with JSON payloads with and without selector disclosure based on the SD-JOT format, which itself is a working group document in this here working group, but this is a layer on top of that describing some specifics as noted here. Thanks, Richard. So what's happened since Dublin? We've published draft 6, 7, and 8. In draft 6, we updated the anticipated media type registration request from application VC plus SD-JOT to application DC plus SD-JOT. You all probably, or at least some of you, were at the meeting and saw the long consternation around that, but it's now done and in the document. We tightened the exposition of the issuer signed JWT verification key validation section. Yes, in fact, that was about removal of the mention of DIDs, and yes, it was intentional to avoid the ire of the DID community. And yes, it was also poking fun at Mike Jones for some phrasing he used around around the similar time. And yeah, we'll be discussing that a bit more later. We also added the status field for the well-known URI registry per some IANA early review that came in just before the update went out. Sorry, I'm looking at the comments. In 07, reverted the change from the previous release that removed the explicit mention of DIDs in the issuer signed JWT verification key validation section. We removed also the requirement to insert a well-known portion for VCT, the type URL definitions, and fix some numberings to align back to the actual latest reference version of SDJOT itself.
Brian, hold on one second. Michael.
Yeah.
Mike Jones, can you please go mute?
Oh, yeah, there's some.
Yeah, there you go. Keep going.
Give me a chance to have a little espresso. Yeah, we finished this. And then real quickly on the follow of 07, we published an 08 that fixed some formatting. When the reintroduction of that paragraph went in, it didn't actually format correctly in our lovely markdown to XML to text and HTML pipelining. So fixed that so it wouldn't look problematic. So setting some expectations about what we're trying to do here. This is phrasing right out of the presentation that occurred in Dublin. We're trying to tighten the scope, simplify, and significantly accelerate the RFC timeline for this document towards meaningful inclusion in what are emerging legal and regulatory frameworks in the EU, and elsewhere, but mostly in the EU. There are many things coming down the line that are being regulated and specified, and the need for a reasonable, interoperable, simple credential format around wallets, and that includes selective disclosure, is important to have, such that it can be referenced by emerging standards, mostly again coming out of Europe, but not explicitly. And we are working hard to produce something that is in fact referenceable here in a accredited standards organization and get that out in a reasonable timeline. Knowing, of course, that timelines are not reasonable in the world of IETF standards, we're still working hard to move towards that. So how did we get here today? Many of you probably already know, but let's go through some of it. So going back, the SDJOT VC document was first introduced as an individual draft prior to the IETF meeting in San Francisco, was presented in San Francisco, and adopted by the working group not long thereafter. San Francisco is a little bit like Vegas, and not that what stays in San Francisco stays in San Francisco, but in that there's a lot of hopes and aspirations. And the document itself was very much aspirational. It had a lot of great concepts. Oliver defined some of them here. Profiling SDJOT for verifiable credentials. Profiling meaning that taking the sort of raw credential token format and similar to ID tokens as they were done in OpenID Connect, sort of profiling them for specific usage, defining the data formats for the actual and a media type for VCs based on SDJOTs with JSON as their payloads, and defining the verification and processing rules around that. This was a very rough document at the time, though. So while there was a lot of interest and excitement around progressing this work, the document itself needed a lot of work, as is sort of common for a 0.0 individual draft version. It was published then shortly after as a 0.0 working group document. In the interim, so after that first one was published, there was an entire section placed in about obtaining, later to be called validating public keys, for validating the issuer signed portion of this token. In that, was some information about getting public keys based on a well-known location of the issuer using HTTPS and normal old-fashioned web PKI. There was a bit about X509 certificates being the sort of root trust anchor to figure out, based on the issuer, what the approved or verified public key to check the signature was with. And there was a section about document resolution. All of this, at the end, there's also a little, I don't know, call it disclaimer, extension point saying that ecosystems may define other rules for obtaining the valid public key to verify these tokens, but these were the ones that went in sort of as attempts at describing interoperable public key validation or resolution. I want to point you to the mail archive discussion about all those methods before they were placed into the document themselves. Then we came along to IETF 118 in Prague, where some of us were and were not present. I took some screenshots here because I was participating remotely. And at least one exciting part of that was staring at the back of Oliver's head here for a little while. Once that was cleared up, Oliver did describe the content that I just described that went into the document, basically obtaining the issuer verification key here. This was the first time, other than seeing the draft, that a number of us had seen any of this content. And immediately I asked the question about whether the inclusion of DIDs here was really necessary. Richard Barnes, signaling through some body language as well as writing in the chat, agreed with me. And there was some subsequent discussion at the time, although ultimately it was decided that the discussion would be deferred to the list. I captured the MeetEcho transcription of the discussion here, but basically the question was asked, do we really need this? Does it add value? Daniel's response was, it's possible that it would be better defined in another document, but the idea here was to profile public key verification or resolution methods similar to what was done for OpenID Connect ID tokens in the context of SD.VC, so that there would be some reasonable interoperable mechanism to do key resolution and signature verification. I did make the point at the time that the way that ID token resolution does it is that there is one way to resolve the public keys, and that actually has been nicely implemented out in the world and achieves some reasonable amount of interoperability. And that was somewhat different than having 3 different methods here, particularly the DID resolution method, which in turn is one syntax that points to a rather large number of actual resolution methods behind it. We did decide to take it to the list, though, to talk about it more. No decisions were actually made in this meeting, but that was the thrust of the discussion at this point. Then in the interim between that meeting and the subsequent meeting, there were some changes made to that section, including some clarification and fixes for the X509 certificate portion of the key resolution bits. Following that, we had our meeting down under, IETF 119 in Brisbane. And there was some discussion there about this document, as there always is. It largely focused around the happenings in Europe and the desire, once again, to produce something that could be used and referenced by the emerging, I'm struggling for the right words, legal and regulatory frameworks to be able to reference and define, reference other technical standards for inclusion in that stuff. And for this document itself to build out the necessary pieces that were, call them requirements from that area, but the stuff that was needed there, focusing largely on that point about defining the metadata, which was largely just a glimmer in the eye of the document at that point. Subsequent to that, another draft was published. This, I'm sorry, I think I miscategorized or missummarized the prior change. The prior change to this key resolution section was actually to take what was a normative requirement to support every one of these key resolution mechanisms and make them optional with respect to the verifier. So basically to qualify each and say, if the verifier recipient supports this way of doing it, then they have to do it this way. Backed off of that, or backed off to that. Here, this particular one is what I said incorrectly about the last change. This was a clarification and corrections to how the X509 variant of the public key resolution worked. Following that, we had a meeting in Vancouver in Canada. I know French isn't widely used in that part of Canada, but it seemed like a fun quote to include here, paying some tribute to the great Steve Martin. Anyway, in IETF 120, we of course talked about this document again. And we did talk a lot about a lot of things in this document, but this was the first time we saw some, or we didn't see, the first time it was clarified to the larger working group that there was this coming contention over this particular media type. There was a lot of talk in and around the actual official meeting and on this subject. And shortly after the official meeting, noting the value and importance of hallway discussions, I was approached by one particular working group participant and asked about the removal of DIDs or decentralized identifiers from the document itself. He said he had intended to raise the question during the meeting, but saw all the other issues we were trying to wade through and felt it was better left to post-meeting discussions. And the conclusion of that conversation in the hallway there was to raise the question as an issue in the GitHub repository that was being used for development and tracking of features in this document. So the issue 250, which is what has been the source of a number of discussions over the last couple of months, was filed. That is dropping all references to DIDs and DID resolution. This amounts to the removal of a single paragraph from that one section of the document that I previously pointed to. I apologize. I'm having a hard time paying attention with the chat going on subsequently. I'll read it at some point afterwards, I guess. Noting that DIDs themselves, there's a lot of them, and a lot's been made over what this means or doesn't mean, but there are, I think, in this particular document, known DID methods in the decentralized identifier ecosystem, which is the equivalent of the rough equivalent of a registry. The W3C doesn't have registries in the same way that IANA maintains them on behalf of the IETF, but this document acts as sort of a living document that is a collection registration of the various DID methods. I think there's 150 or so in here. I've heard numbers in the 130s quoted and some as high as 200, but this seems to be the official number. Just noting that there's a lot of different DID methods, and mention of a single requirement to support DIDs is rather open-ended and somewhat short of facilitating actual interoperability. Anyway, that item 250 did lead to some discussion. Indeed, I will point you to one particular point that there seems to be a sort of discussion past or a failure to communicate effectively with one another. And I will jump to the point here where I did, in fact, say that I believe the discourse and arguments in favor of the DID language in the document itself were tiresome. I used the word tiresome because it adequately represented my feeling on the discourse, which is in fact that it's extremely tiresome. It is, I don't know how else to say it. veers quickly into this advocacy of the general theology and hopes and dreams, I'm sorry, behind DIDs themselves, while misunderstanding or maybe intentionally misconstruing the actual implications of the change to the draft itself. And so I guess I called it the way that I saw it. And so somewhat later, a pull request was put in that removed one paragraph from the document itself. And it did so using this language that was not specific to removal of DIDs and did not link back to the issue itself. And this was, in fact, done to avoid continued discussion, and I use that word, argument, without what seemed to be good faith argument, maybe on both sides, maybe from one side. The parenthetical bit here was added later in response to grave concerns over the fact that the pull request that removed DIDs did not mention the word dead.
Brian, please make sure that we also have some time for discussions. We're already 26 minutes into the meeting.
Doing my best, Hannes. How would you like me to do that? Should we stop now, or would you like me to try to proceed through the content?
Yeah, it depends how many slides we ultimately have and how long it takes you to get through them. I just want to make sure that we do indeed have time to debate the issue and try to have an idea on what direction we want to go.
Okay, I'll do my best to fit everything in. Meanwhile, I guess isn't specifically relevant, but we had the large fight over media types, who owned what, and as I mentioned during that and in the long presentation I gave at IETF Dublin itself, there is maybe more than a particular string at question here, and really maybe some deeper theological or philosophical differences that are manifesting through all this. Anyway, that came up. There was a lot of discussion on a different list about it. We had then IETF in Dublin, which I did said presentation, which was long. A couple of things we noted during that presentation. By the way, the Scottish references, as close as I've ever been to Scotland, even though my heritage is Scottish, Irish was as close. So I tried to include a little bit of humor in here. But we did discuss a couple of issues in the course of the discussion around media types. One was the removal of the well-known resolution method with respect to type metadata. And the other was a discussion about dropping DIDs and DID references. This was all discussed in the meeting itself. And ultimately arriving on what I tried to dub the Dublin Accord, which was a clear set of initiatives with respect to this document, basically changing the media type, not changing any other naming conventions right now, that I think getting to the VC versus DC debate that maybe is going on in the chat that I'm not reading right now, and then tighten the scope, simplify, and significantly accelerate the RFC timeline for this document to try to get something published in a reasonable time frame so it can be used and referenced by the various initiatives, particularly that from the EU. That included removal of DIDs, that included the adjustment to the way VC type metadata was resolved with respect to an HTTPS URL. And during the course of that meeting, there was consent is not the right word. There was approval for this approach voiced during the meeting itself, a IETF meeting that, under the note well and so forth for IETF development of IETF documents. Anyway, subsequent to that, we tried to act on some of that. I published version 6 of the document, removing DIDs, changing the way that VC type metadata was resolved, And there was a bit of a kerfuffle that blew up on the mailing list online. It's smaller now on my screen than it was when I was developing the slides, so I'm not sure which specifics to point to. But there was a lot of language used around violation of process and insinuating different motives and lack of adherence to process and so forth. Ultimately, the chair stepped in and asked that the conversation be stopped online while we could work towards scheduling this interim and discussing potential resolutions. Some people did follow that request and some didn't. Shortly after, sorry, one more quick one. I do want to point out the questions here that DIDs were not actually prohibited in any way by this change. This was not a breaking change in any way. So speculating a bit on the major outcry to a relatively small change to a document, again, it's only speculation, but seems to me there's some deep ideological disagreements at play here that are only manifesting themselves in a disagreement over a little bit of text. Potentially there's credibility seeking by trying to have inclusion in an IETF standards track document, things that are not themselves IETF related technologies. Perhaps there's a heroic stand against populism here. I don't know. There has been some insinuation that a drive towards meaningful interoperability and simplicity is actually a populist play against things. Interesting perspective to look at it. Or perhaps there's a genuine misunderstanding of the change and the ramifications thereof. I see a question. Do you want to stop here and discuss it, or do you want me to press on?
Yeah, let's give Stefan a chance to comment here. Go ahead, Stefan. Can you hear us?
Yeah, yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes,
Yes.
I can.
Okay. So first of all, thanks a lot for this history, Brian. I think I would recommend that we do not start with concerns and attacks against each other. So to say that somebody wants to have something in a standard because it wants to have an IETF label, to be honest, I do standardizations in 15 years. If I want to have something in a standard, I don't go to IETF, I go to ISO, because the effect of an ISO standard is much higher than an IETF standard. So, or I go to ETSI because there's also the effect much higher. So, to be honest, let's not work with this wording. And on the other hand, concerning the DID, you gave a really big background, but what I still miss are the core technical reasons why you removed. I heard there was one person said, okay, please remove. EU, difficult. Yeah, if you go into industrial cases, we have many use cases where we need it. Implementing acts is also since the 21st of November not really an argument because the implementing act for the attestation of attributes is published and it does not contain SDJ3C, it contains WCC, BCDM and ISO MDL. So this subject is solved, I think. So I still ask, what are the core technical questions, technical reasons, or maybe use case reasons why it was removed? And my last other question would be a bit, might it be a possibility to discuss how we can adjust the specification in a way that it's, let's say, a bit an umbrella specification with some extensions, where other standardization body in different ecosystems may specify further under this umbrella, because in this case it might be a bridge to avoid DID in the core specification, but gives several ecosystems the possibility to specify how to put DID in a STJVC without violating the specification, and this could really solve the issue. So could you please elaborate on the technical stuff, and could you on technical reasons, and could this umbrella may be a bridge? Thanks.
On the latter point, the area that's highlighted here was and is and always was meant to be a viable extension point to facilitate exactly that kind of ecosystem specific need that I think you mentioned, which is part of why I've struggled to understand the significant concern raised over removal of this particular bit of text, because exactly what you seem to be asking for is still allowed here. And this document, it has this particular extension point allowed. If there are other areas where this document is too restrictive or otherwise prohibits use cases that you have in mind, it would probably be worthwhile to try to identify those and discuss them. As such, I appreciate your perspective regarding other standards organizations and processes and what is credible and is not credible. From my perspective, though, I am working on a document here in the IETF where I made a change to it and was basically attacked for that, citing processes and regulations that did not actually exist. So Brian, it's a little hard, Brian, to, yes.
Yeah, please let us stop this, and I want to focus on the technical side. So let's focus on that part right now, and we will deal with the other issue later. Okay, so let's. I wanna hear again from Stefan. Did Brian answer your technical question? Because Brian is saying that the change doesn't change the story and supports exactly what you're looking for. Stefan.
This is, yeah, from my point of view, looking in the spec, it does not fully support. But maybe this is something we could look a bit deeper in a one-to-one, or maybe with the other editors session, just to look. Did we oversee something, or is it not clearly mentioned? Is it not clearly understandable? Anyway, yeah. So if this is an if this is an option, I think that would solve. But I still want to understand, what's the technical reason why you removed? This is what I still don't understand. I understand you removed due to request, but I do not understand the technical reasons.
I can comment on the technical issues if we work through the queue.
Sorry, Marcus. I'll let Richard jump in here, just because he wants to get into that specific topic. So,
I was happy to wait for Marcus if Marcus wants to go ahead. Okay.
Go ahead, Richard. Go ahead.
So honestly, I wasn't involved in the decision to remove this, but I totally understand it, because if the objective here is to have something that you can write code that implements the thing, and you can do interop testing to verify that your code implements that thing, you cannot have a provision in here that says implement did, because as was pointed out, there's more than 200 did methods, and no one is going to sit down and implement all 200 of those to start with, plus the unbounded space of all future ones in the future. So if we're going to have an interop target, it can't just say did. We would at least have to say something far more concrete than that, which I don't think would meet the need you're asking for. So that's the concrete technical reason for not having a general did specific provision in here, which makes 100% sense to me. That said, Brian, I think the text you've highlighted here does seem a little insufficient to me in terms of offering that way forward. Even the issuer metadata in X509 is there's some conflict there, right? Because you can put an HTTPS URI in there, and it could a verifier could use either one. So it seems like what we need here is that the verifier, the issuer needs to issue, and the issuer is going to have a set of ways that it publishes its key, right? It could publish through these HTTPS mechanisms, it could publish via the X59 mechanism, it could publish via some DID. And the verifier needs to use one of those things that the verifier used to publish, right? There needs to be this kind of meeting point.
One of the things that the issuer issued.
Yes, so the verifier needs to get the issuer's key from some channel in which the issuer published its key, right? They need to use the same thing.
Correct.
So it seems like, that's how you figure out what the available meeting places are is a little bit, at least ambiguous, is not specified here. So if we had that sort of, one more field to specify that, it seems like it would, to say, it would be some sort of like issuer key lookup : VC metadata or X509 or maybe a list of these things, like ways you should resolve this issuer identifier I've put up here. And if it's if it's an HTTPS URL, maybe you need that thing to disambiguate. If it's a DID URL, maybe the DID says enough. Yeah, so something like Christine is saying in the chat. But like, it seems like there's a need for like one more field here to say like what that meeting point is. And at that point, you have that extensibility that says, like, even if it's an HTTPS, well, I mean, already, if the issuer URL is a DID, then like you use the DID thing. But if it's an HTTPS URL, you have this ambiguity. So like it seems like there's a little bit more mechanism here. But I think the overall right answer is to have an extensible set, because clearly we have at least two now. And have enough machinery so that the verifier and the issuer end up meeting on this spot that they both intend. So like that seems like the underlying like technical principles to stick to here.
Just real quickly, I think that was the intent here. I don't actually believe an additional field is necessary to achieve that, but I will admit that this text needs some work, and there's even an issue outstanding on it right now.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we have the same URI being processed in different ways, depending only on the recipient's properties and nothing to do with the verifier. So that seems problematic. So I'm happy to iterate on this text, but I think we need a little bit more than what's here right now.
That's fair.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Richard. Marcus, and please focus on the technical side of the story. I can't hear you, Marcus. Are you speaking? Can people hear Marcus? I can't.
I cannot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe similar audio issues.
Yeah, okay. Watson. We'll get back to Marcus later. Go ahead, Watson.
Hello. Thank you for work on the draft. I think there is serious security issues with the way the issuer is constructed now, especially if you add more methods. And the reason is that if people trust a set of issuers, then if you add a new resolution method, they might not own, you might have an issuer field, right? That string, which they don't own in the space the new resolution method works on. So someone can take it. We already kind of have this problem with the HTTPS URL one, where that HTTPS URL could be something you get an X509 certificate, or it could be that website. So if the domain goes invalid for whatever reason, gets scooped up, now I can send in the keys, sign everything, and people will still trust it. So I think these two things really say, no, we got to have some indication of how you're supposed to resolve it that's part of the issuer and part of the thing you trust. And the security considerations right now are really bare bones. There's not a lot of discussion of what is it you have to configure to be sure you're only trusting the issuers you want to trust and how you scope down what you show. There's another issue about the metadata thing that's going to have to be part of that discussion.
Okay, thanks, Watson. Brian, any comment on this? Go ahead.
Only that it's very much intended to be a secure mechanism that links back through some third-party certification, via either the certificate or the certificate associated with the domain hosting the public keys. So there may well be additional security considerations that are needed there, but I can't say I fully followed what all of that, I guess, would be.
So maybe, Watson, can I ask you to send those concerns to the mailing list, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And this
Okay.
is not, this has been a slowly forming realization amongst a few of us, starting from the ambiguity of what happens when you have a URL in there. And so I will definitely write an email to the list explaining the issue. I see some things in the chat about people saying it's exactly what we had with the client ID thing in Open ID before. So yeah, I will absolutely send that email, hopefully in the next few days.
Okay, thanks, Watson. I want to give a chance for Marcus. Mike, Marcus was ahead of you in the queue before. I want to give him a chance to speak up right now. Marcus, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry about that.
No
The
worries.
problem earlier. So yeah, regarding the dates, I also wanted to say thank you quickly to Brian for explaining the history and the background, and for rewarding the pull request. And I also agree we should focus on the technical topics and leave out these discussions about process violations and things like that. I think it's much simpler than it seems. Maybe there are a lot of people on GitHub who have expressed that they would like to keep support for DIDs. There have been a number of concrete arguments, so I think this has nothing to do with ideology or general advocacy or credibility seeking or making a heroic stand or hopes and dreams or anything like that. It's just that there are a lot of implementations and concrete projects that use this specification with DIDs. So I think the arguments that it's not possible to implement this, or that DIDs are not implementable or not interoperable, I think there's a lot of evidence with concrete projects out there that that's not really true. I know that DID methods as an extensibility mechanism, and this list of 200 DID methods, that this can be a little bit confusing and misunderstood, but it does not mean that it's cannot be implemented or are not interoperable. And I think, just to finish my statement, we've had this discussion before, right? There was an issue in the pull request a few months ago when DIDs were still mandatory to implement in the specification, and we had this whole argument, right? The people who wanted support for DIDs and people who didn't want support for DIDs, and the consensus was to make them optional. And that seemed to, at that time, that seemed to be something that everyone was happy with. So I wonder a bit why that consensus didn't last, and why the topic has been reopened in the first place.
Okay, thanks. Mike.
Yeah, to the technical point that made me support removal. And as background, I was in the DID working group. I know them very well. We tried to get it chartered to where there would be mandatory to implement DID methods. And for whatever reasons, that did not happen. It's still not happening. This reflects on Richard's point, which is that the text in the spec, both before and now, do not facilitate writing tests against implementations to ensure interoperability. Now, Marcus makes the point, and he's correct, that it's possible to implement DIDs interoperably, and that's not a point of debate. But that's different than the specification saying enough about the DID methods to know whether you can interoperate based on two independent implementations, unless there's a configuration mechanism which says we're using did XYZ and did PDQ, and you must not use did 1, 2, 3, then you do not facilitate or you do not guarantee interoperability. And as a technical point, unless we're going to guarantee interoperability of a feature, we should exclude the feature. That's always been my point. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Daniel.
Yeah, I just wanted to very briefly reiterate what I think it was Richard said in the very beginning, that ideally what we have in a spec is implementable in a somewhat concise way, and it is testable as well. So I think it makes much more sense to have this spec as small as possible. And that is also what I already discussed with Steffen, and then have another spec extending this and say, here are the did methods that we think are useful within a European ecosystem or somewhere else, and then also to specify all the details of how you would use them. And then you have two specs that are both implementable, that are somewhat concise, that are testable, instead of just saying here, look, you can use bits, it's optional or not, or whatever, and then you just open it up to this huge field of various methods and so on, what we've discussed. So I think the approach makes sense for that reason.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Christina.
Yeah, 2 points. First, can we please very clearly separate whether we're talking about the issuer's identifier and issuer signature and the holder's identifier and the keys? Because the solutions and problems raised are very different. Like for the issuers, maybe client ID scheme is the solution if like the problem Watson's raising, is a problem. And for holders, again, it's different. So I think we should very clearly separate those two problems and tackle them one by one. Having said that, at least for the holder, I do want to ask to make a specific suggestion. I don't know if anyone raised it before or if it was discussed, but yeah, like kind of building up on Daniel's, like additional spec approach. If we define confirmation.did, so confirmation claim RFC 7800 allows extension points, right? It allows different representation of keys. So if we define DIDs as one of them, so there is a way to use confirmation claim with DIDs, and then you have to mandate which DID method, but like, okay, fine, let's leave it aside. Define confirmation.did, as DJVC specs as the confirmation claim mandatory, but that, that allows DIDs, right? Using confirmation.did method. Would something like that be acceptable as a way forward for the holder keys?
That's
Is that
not
the
actually
question?
I actually agree with you, Christian. I think you're right, but that's not actually a question in any of this. So it would probably be better if we could. And
sorry,
actually
how is it
discuss
not a question? What am I not understanding? Because I think we
that.
should be discussing things like that.
I didn't say we shouldn't be discussing those. That's not a question in this particular issue, and the change and the reverting the change and the change again. So it probably is something that we
Well,
should be discussing, allowing for those mechanisms to be used if in fact they're needed, and if anything in the document itself prohibits them, that is something we should talk about. But that's not I guess the issue at hand.
Well, I disagree with you because like we already heard that the text we have right now is not good enough. You agreed. And there are mechanisms to unblock it. And like you've been repeatedly saying that nothing prohibits it, but people are not buying into that. So I think we need something specific.
Okay, thanks, Christina. Let's keep going. Christian.
Yeah, I have a question. Maybe just to clarify what I also put in the chat. Maybe that could be helpful here in this group. In Europe, we have a standardization work item, which focus exactly on functional interoperability requirements on DIT methods. So the idea is to define one of each, one decentralized one, one ephemeral one, and one web-based one DIT methods to define functional requirements, interoperability requirements, etc. So this would a bit solve what you said, Brian. We don't want to do anything, yeah, not the whole world. In this case, we may end in 10 years, so this is not the idea, but to define it for one method for each, one example for each method. And we also have in mind to specify how STJVC and DIT could work together. So exactly this gap, or this what we are discussing here, could be a possibility to say, okay, like Daniel said, to have a specification on the IETF level, which contains all the must-haves, yeah, but is a bit the basics, the fundamentals. So it's no assessment, but to develop anything with, or to delete anything which could be defined somewhere else. And this is exactly what Zen could do, and exactly solve this discussion what we have here. So this would solve our subject. I look a bit to Marcus, what we have in our ecosystem, yeah. But it would solve your subject here that you do not have to put anything in your specification. So some of the parts you mentioned are part of a work item which is already set in on the Zen level in Europe.
Okay, we have 3 minutes to go, guys. So let's give other people a chance to speak up here. Marcus.
Yes, I agree with Stefan said could be a solution. I also wanted to quickly comment on what Mike said again about the interoperability aspect of having so many DIT methods. So yes, of course, if you have different implementations of DITs that use different methods, then we can agree then that's not interoperable. But think about it this way: DIT methods are an extensibility mechanism in a very similar way as the yellow box that you have here on the screen is also an extensibility mechanism. Right here, you're saying that additional specifications can define other rules for discovering the keys, and that's what DIT methods already provide, right? So I think one potential risk of removing DITs here is that instead of having 200 DIT methods, people may end up defining 200 of these yellow box kind of extensions for this specification. And I think then you will end up with even less interoperability, considering all the real life deployments and implementations of DITs that we have already.
Okay, thanks, Marcus. Oliver.
Yes, hello. Yeah, the DIT resolution text was not clear enough and underspecified, primarily for the more than 200 DIT methods and lack of standardization. There's a big interop risk, hence the removal, which I support. So since the spec still allows ecosystems to add additional issue key discovery methods, experimental profile of this spec could be written by somebody else already. I don't support the inclusion of DIT resolution in this spec at the moment for the interop challenge as mentioned before. However, since you already have an extensibility mechanism, the one that Marcus just pointed out, perhaps it's not clear enough. I think a good way forward might be making an extensibility point more obvious. So the issuer could indicate the intended issuer key, discovery methods as a dedicated claim, or perhaps a prefix. We have already some experiences with that in the OpenID Foundation, which would also act as an extension point, potentially fixing Constan's and Stefan's concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Oliver. And Hank.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. I'm known to do that. Just first, don't be belating specification versus standardization point here right now. I want to highlight experience from the SCID working group, the Supply Chain Integrity, Transparency, and Trust working group that also started with DID methods. And interestingly, it got tanked about the trustworthiness of the resolver. So you can't show that a resolver does what it does without remote attestation, or was intended to do, nothing else. And that was a huge concern, like a hard blocker, and it almost tanked the whole effort until we decided to remove the DID specifications from the SCID architecture, which included it at one point. Actually, it was built on it. And so just lesson learned from over there. There's even if the technological interoperability to standardization is solved at some point, how would you trust the resolver to do its thing correctly? And tying it to regulation, which meets some government requirements, seems like again still a problem. So I would not do it now and here. To be honest, it's inviting disaster. To be honest.
Okay, thanks, Hank. Brian, you wanna wrap it up here? Like you have one slide you wanna talk about
I
here?
would jump to one slide.
Okay.
As I don't know, we got my recommendation here is.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Brian. Go ahead.
Well, this is what I was hoping to get to through everything, to a recommendation on this, and that is continue on the path trying to move this forward, including the removal of the one paragraph that mentions did. If we need to also consider removal of other problematic or underspecified areas, we should do that as well. This needs to be done sufficient for the requisite rigor of a standards track IETF document that's subject to chair, AD, ISG review, etc. I also suggest that we evaluate, particularly the stakeholders that are interested in it, to ensure that the necessary extension points and allowances exist to accommodate different deployment models or ideologies. This, I believe, is in line with exactly what Stefan was suggesting. And develop extensions or profiles as appropriate in the appropriate venue for the appropriate audiences. There's a lot of different ones here. I'm not sure exactly what would be appropriate, but it sounds like CEN is one that there's interest in. And I mentioned here that there has been discussion. I didn't mention, I was going to mention, there's been discussion of a desire to have an overall descriptions of DID usage in the context of JWT type technology. And I was only going to say that I'd be happy to help folks that are interested in that dispatch that work to the IETF if in fact that's what they want to pursue.
I think to add to this, so it was good to have the discussion today. We're not quite there yet, that's my sense. And I think Rifat, and our AD, Deb, and I will have to chat about this on the best ways forward. I think we better understand each other now, but there's still some way to go here.
So yeah, I agree with that. Like Brian, like you've heard a few comments about the text being still kind of not clear enough or not explicit enough to allow that extensibility. Do you agree with that, or you don't think? Like, what's your sense of that?
That particular bit of text I think is pretty clear. I'd be happy to have it be more explicit if it's necessary and I read it wrong. There's also been commentary like the that I think Christine and I weren't actually having is there's other areas where this stuff is actually maybe applicable and needs to be looked at that isn't sufficiently extensible. And that's what I'm suggesting we also look at here. So it's, I don't know, it's multifaceted, I guess, but
Right.
the
Okay.
general recommendation here is to take out explicit pointers to this technology and make sure that the necessary placeholders, extension points, allowances, whatever you want to call them, actually exist in the document such that they don't preclude the use by stakeholders that are interested in using them. And that has, I think, been the point of contention is the belief that that stuff is precluded. And there may be places right now that need to be adjusted, but I don't think it's in the particular point of the issuer signature. But I'd be happy to look at improving the text around extensibility there if that's helpful.
Okay. Yeah. So
Does that make sense?
So and we really urge the comment, like the people that commented on that specific text, like Richard and Christine and others, to please provide like that feedback on the list, just to make sure people are clear on what is it exactly that is missing and whatever. Like make sure we capture that, right? So, and we are 6 minutes past. So anything else, Hannes? You wanna?
No, I think we just need to sort of do a little bit more homework and discuss further. And I think.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, Hannes, you and I, and maybe we can chat with Deb also about this. But you and I can discuss this. I want to thank everyone, Brian, Stefan, and everybody here. Like, I appreciate all the work here, and I think we're making some progress, and hopefully we'll make it better next time too. So thank you all, and we'll talk next Monday.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Fuck you.